My brother started laughing before the lawyer even finished the sentence. A tackle box, Derek said, tasting the word like something sour. 15 years of being the responsible one, and Grandpa left you a tackle box. 11 people in that lawyer's office laughed with him. My mother, my Aunt Pam, my cousins, even the paralegal who tried to cover it with a cough. I sat there with a rusted metal box on my lap that smelled like lake water and 3-in-1 oil, and I smiled, because that's what you do when a room full of people you used to call family is laughing at you. What none of us knew yet, what I didn't find out until 4 minutes later, was that the lawyer hadn't read the last page. And the last page was the only page that mattered. If you've ever been the one everyone in your family underestimated, the one who did the quiet work while somebody louder took the bow, stay with me, because this story is for you. And if you want to know exactly what happened when that last page got read, hit subscribe now, because I promise you, none of us walked out of that office the same person who walked in. My name is Claire. I'm 34, and I'm a forensic accountant in Columbus, Ohio. I spend my days finding the dollar that doesn't belong, the transaction that's been split into 3 smaller ones, to avoid a reporting threshold. The vendor that doesn't actually exist. I'm good at it. I'm good at it because my grandfather taught me to read a balance sheet before I could drive a car. There's one thing about me my coworkers notice and never ask about. I wear a cheap digital Casio watch. The kind you'd find in a gas station for $15. It still works perfectly. My grandfather gave it to me when I was 12. The summer he started letting me sit in the back office of his hardware store and add up the day's receipts on an adding machine that printed on a curling paper tape. He said, "A watch should tell time, Claire, bear, not tell people how much money you have." I've worn it every day since. It was already on my wrist the morning the call came that he'd died. My grandfather, Walter Hadley, built Hadley Hardware from one store in Mansfield, Ohio, in 1968 into 12 stores across 3 counties. By the time I was a teenager, it was the kind of business that got written up in the local paper as a success story. The kind of business everyone assumed would stay in the family forever. And it was always understood. The way these things get understood without anyone ever saying it out loud. That my older brother Derek was the one who'd run it someday. Derek was loud, charming, good at golf, good at handshakes. He went to business school. He got a company truck before he was old enough to legally drive it alone. I went to Ohio State for accounting, and the running joke at every Thanksgiving was that I was the boring one. The one who'd end up doing somebody else's taxes, while Derek ran the family empire. I laughed along with that joke for about 15 years before I understood it wasn't really a joke. Here's the part where the story stops being funny. 6 years ago, the bookkeeper at Hadley Hardware had a stroke and had to retire suddenly, and my grandfather, who trusted almost nobody with numbers, asked me to come in for just a few weeks to get the books in order until they hired someone permanent. I said yes, because I always said yes to my grandfather, and because I was curious, honestly, what 50+ years of a family business actually looked like under the hood. What I found in those few weeks was a vendor called Crestline Logistics Solutions that had been invoiced over $340,000 across 4 years for freight consolidation services. That, as far as I could tell from every shipping record in the system, had never actually been performed. Crestline Logistics Solutions had one listed officer, my brother's wife's maiden name, with a middle initial swapped, and an address that turned out to be a UPS mailbox 2 towns over. I didn't go to the family with it. I went to my grandfather, alone, on a Tuesday evening, at his kitchen table, with printouts spread out between us like a crime scene. He read every page. He didn't say much. He asked me one question. "Does anyone else know you found this?" And when I told him no, he nodded slowly and said he'd handle it. He asked me to keep it between us, just for a little while he figured out the right way to do it without blowing the family apart. I trusted him. I trusted him completely. What I didn't know was that handling it meant a quiet conversation with Derek that ended with Derek agreeing to pay it back through a reduced share of some future inheritance. A private arrangement. Written down nowhere that I knew of, sealed with nothing but my grandfather's word and Derek's promise. And I didn't know that within a month, Derek had figured out exactly where that information had come from. He never confronted me directly. That wasn't his style. Instead, over the following year, I started noticing I wasn't getting invited to things. A cousin's engagement party. A 4th of July barbecue. When I asked my mother why, she got vague in a way that felt rehearsed. And eventually one of my cousins let it slip. Derek had told the family I'd tried to dig up dirt on him because I was jealous he was taking over the business, and I wasn't. He'd told them I'd gone snooping through the books looking for something, anything, to make him look bad, because deep down I'd always resented that he was Grandpa's favorite. By the time I tried to defend myself, the story had already calcified. Nobody wanted to hear my side, because my side required them to believe Derek had stolen from his own family's company. And that was a much harder thing to sit with at Thanksgiving than believing his sister was bitter. So I became the bitter sister. For 6 years, that's who I was at every family gathering I wasn't invited to. I spent 2 of those years in therapy with a woman named Dr. Reyes, mostly because I couldn't understand why losing access to a family that had never really seen me anyway hurt as much as it did. She said something to me once that I wrote down and kept on a sticky note on my monitor for years afterward. She said, "You spent your whole life being useful so you'd be loved. And then you found out the love was conditional on you staying quiet about how useful you were." I didn't fully understand that sentence until the day of the will reading. My mother called me on a Tuesday morning in March, and I almost didn't pick up. Because my mother hadn't called me first in longer than I could remember. Grandpa had passed away 2 days earlier. Congestive heart failure, not unexpected, he was 81, and the funeral had already happened. Nobody told me. My mother's explanation was that all happened so fast, which might have been true, except that Facebook told a different story. There were photos of the funeral posted the same evening, 40, some people in black, a reception afterward at the Elks Lodge. What my mother was calling about was the will reading, scheduled for that Friday at the law office of a man named Harold Voss. Grandpa specifically said you needed to be there, she told me. He was very particular about it. I asked why nobody told me about the funeral. She said, "We didn't want to upset you." In the exact tone of voice she used to say things that were designed to upset me on a delay. I almost didn't go. I sat with that decision for 2 days. But there was a version of me, a 12-year-old in the back office with an adding machine, who had loved that old man without any conditions at all, and that version of me wanted to say goodbye properly, even 4 days late, even to an empty chair. So I drove the 90 minutes from Columbus to Mansfield on Friday morning, and somewhere on Route 30, I passed the turnoff for the lake, where Grandpa used to take me fishing every June. Just the 2 of us, before Derek got old enough that the trips became family trips, and quietly stopped including just me. I didn't take the turnoff. I kept driving, and I told myself this was just a formality, an afternoon, and then I'd drive home and never have to see most of these people again. Harold Voss's office was on the 2nd floor of a brick building on Main Street that had been there since before either Hadley Hardware or I existed. When I walked in, 11 people were already seated. My mother, my Aunt Pam and her husband, 3 cousins and 2 of their spouses, and Derek, with his wife, Crystal, sitting in the chair closest to the lawyer's desk like she'd reserved it. Nobody stood up. Nobody hugged me. My mother said, "Oh, you made it," in a tone that suggested there'd been some debate about whether I would. Derek didn't look at me at all until Mr. Voss asked everyone to take their seats, and then he gave me one slow once-over, the kind of look that catalogs everything. My plain blazer, my civic keys still in my hand, the cheap watch on my wrist, and filed it away as confirmation of something he'd already decided about me a long time ago. Mr. Voss was a careful, gray-haired man who'd apparently been my grandfather's attorney for almost 30 years. and he read through the will the way I imagine he'd read through hundreds of them. Steady, unhurried, occasionally pausing to clarify a term. The house on Birchwood Lane went to my mother, along with its contents, which got a small, satisfied nod from her. The vacation property at the lake went to my Aunt Pam. 3 vehicles, some smaller cash gifts to the cousins, a donation to the Mansfield Volunteer Fire Department that Grandpa had apparently supported for decades without anyone knowing. And then Mr. Voss turned a page and said, "To my grandson, Derek Walter Hadley, I leave the entirety of Hadley Hardware, Incorporated, including all operating assets, inventory accounts, and the company's interests as currently structured, effective immediately upon my death." Derek exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for years. Crystal grabbed his arm. My Aunt Pam clapped, actually clapped twice like he'd won an award. Someone said, "There it is." And someone else said, "Finally." Officially. And for about 30 seconds the room felt like a celebration I hadn't been invited to, in real time, while I was sitting in it. Then Mr. Voss said, "And to my granddaughter, Claire Mary Hadley, I leave my fishing tackle box and its complete contents, as it currently sits in the cabin at the lake property." And that's when Derek laughed first. "A tackle box," he said again, shaking his head. Grinning at Crystal, like this was the punchline he'd been waiting for his whole life. "Honestly, that's perfect." That's just, he didn't even finish the sentence. My Aunt Pam laughed too, a short, sharp sound, and one of my cousins muttered something I didn't catch that made 2 other people snort. My mother didn't laugh, exactly. But she did that thing where she pressed her lips together and looked down at her lap, which from her was its own kind of agreement. Mr. Voss, to his credit, didn't laugh. He just waited, the way professionals wait when a room needs a minute, to get its noise out of its system, and then Derek leaned toward me, still grinning, and said the thing I'll remember for the rest of my life. "Wes, Grandpa knew exactly who you were, Claire. After everything, that's what you get. A box of rusty hooks." He said it lightly, like a joke between siblings, but everyone in that room knew exactly what "after everything" meant, because everyone in that room had heard Derek's version of everything for 6 years. I didn't say anything. I'd learned a long time ago that silence does more work in a room like that than words ever could. I just sat there, holding a tackle box I hadn't even seen yet, while 11 people I shared blood with looked at me, like I was a punchline that had finally landed where it belonged. And that's exactly the moment. That exact moment, with Derek still smiling, with my mother still looking at her lap. That Mr. Voss cleared his throat, turned one more page and said, "There's an addendum. Mr. Hadley added this provision 8 months ago, and asked that it be read in full, after the primary bequests, and in the presence of all named beneficiaries." The room went quiet in a different way than before. Derek's smile didn't disappear, not yet, but it got the careful, frozen quality of a smile someone's holding in place on purpose. Mr. Voss put on a different pair of glasses, which felt theatrical even though I don't think he meant it that way, and he began to read. 8 years ago, he read, I established a separate holding entity, Hadley Family Properties LLC, and over the following years transferred into it the deeds to the land and buildings underlying all 12 Hadley Hardware retail locations, as well as the company's 2 distribution warehouses. This transfer was completed and recorded with the relevant county auditors, and Hadley Hardware, Incorporated, has operated on these properties under a lease agreement with Hadley Family Properties LLC since that time. Mr. Voss paused, looked up briefly, and continued. Upon my death, full ownership of Hadley Family Properties LLC, and therefore of all real property on which Hadley Hardware operates, transfers in its entirety to my granddaughter, Claire Marie Hadley, as sole member and managing owner. For a second nobody in the room reacted at all, because for a second, nobody understood what they'd just heard. I understood it before anyone else did, because I'm an accountant, and because I'd spent 6 years reading documents, exactly like this one, for a living. What it meant was that Derek had just inherited a company. Its inventory, its bank accounts, its name. That operated entirely on land it didn't own, Land that, as of about 90 seconds ago, belonged to me, Derek said. Wait. What? And Crystal said, I don't. What does that mean? And Mr. Voss, very calmly, said, it means Mr. Hadley separated the operating business from the real estate it sits on, several years ago, and left the operating business to Derek, and the real estate to Claire. Going forward, Hadley Hardware will need to negotiate lease terms with Claire's LLC for continued use of all 12 store locations and both warehouses, as the existing leases were structured at below market rates and contain a clause allowing renegotiation upon change of ownership of either party. He let that sit for a moment, and then added, there's also a letter. Mr. Hadley asked that I read it aloud after this section, regardless of how the room reacted. His words, not mine. The letter was 2 pages handwritten, and Mr. Voss read it in my grandfather's own slightly old-fashioned phrasing. And I'm not going to pretend I didn't cry, because I did, right there in that office, in front of all of them. He wrote that 6 years ago. A granddaughter he trusted had brought him proof that someone he loved had been stealing from the family business, and that he had made a mistake, his word, mistake, by trying to handle it quietly instead of honestly, and that the cost of that mistake had been borne entirely by the one person who'd done nothing wrong. He wrote that he'd watched, for 6 years, as I was slowly erased from a family I had never stopped loving, and that he hadn't fixed it while he was alive, because he was a coward about confrontation in his own family, the same as most people are. But that he wasn't going to let his cowardice be the last word. He wrote that he was leaving Derek the business because Derek had built real things with it too, over the years, and because punishing him forever wasn't the point. But that he was leaving me the ground it stood on, because the only person in this family who'd ever told him the truth, even when it cost her everything, deserved to never again be in a room where her word didn't matter. The last line of the letter was, Claire, they're laughing because they think the tackle box is the whole inheritance. Let them finish laughing. Then open it. Mr. Voss folded the letter, set it down, and said, gently, that's the end of the addendum. I'm not going to walk you through every second of what happened next. Because honestly, most of it wasn't satisfying in the way revenge is supposed to be satisfying. It was just sad. Crystal started crying. My Aunt Pam said, this has to be a mistake, Walter wouldn't. And then stopped, because Mr. very quietly, said the documents had been independently verified by 2 county auditors' offices, and that he had copies if anyone wanted to review them. Derek didn't yell. That was the part I hadn't expected. He just sat there, very still, staring at the table, and after almost a full minute he said, to no one in particular, he knew. This whole time he knew, and he never said anything to me. I almost felt sorry for him in that moment. The same way you can feel sorry for someone even after everything. And then I thought about 6 years of empty chairs at Thanksgiving, and the feeling passed. I picked up the tackle box and opened it right there at the table. Underneath 2 trays of lures and a coil of fishing line was a manila envelope with my name on it in my grandfather's handwriting, and inside that were copies of every printout I'd shown him at his kitchen table 6 years earlier, along with a flash drive and a note that just said, in case Voss's copies ever go missing. Do H. My grandfather, it turned out, hadn't just believed me. He'd kept the evidence himself for 6 years quietly, the same way he'd quietly restructured an entire company's ownership, because some part of him had been planning to do this since the week I first showed him those numbers. In the months after, things didn't resolve into some clean, cinematic ending, but they resolved into something real. Derek and I sat down, with lawyers on both sides, and renegotiated the leases. Fair market rate, which was a significant increase from what Grandpa had quietly been charging. But I gave Derek a 5-year phase, and instead of an immediate jump, because I didn't actually want to watch 12 stores, and the people who worked in them go under out of spite. My mother called me 3 weeks later and said, stiffly, that she was sorry things had gotten the way they'd gotten, which is the closest to an apology I think she's capable of. And I took it, Because I've learned that sometimes you have to accept the apology someone is able to give, not the one you deserve. Aunt Pam still hasn't spoken to me. My cousin Megan, sorry. In this story, it was actually my cousin Jenna, who'd quietly texted me on my birthday every year of the silence. Drove up to Columbus a month later and we got dinner. And she cried and apologized for laughing in that office, and I told her it was okay, because she was 19 and scared, and laughing along is what 19-year-olds do in rooms run by people like Derek. I still wear the Casio. I still have the tackle box, lures and all, sitting on a shelf in my apartment. And every once in a while, when I'm reviewing a lease agreement or signing off on a property tax filing for 12 stores I never asked to own, I think about that room and the 30 seconds where everyone laughed. And I think about how my grandfather knew. He must have known that the people who laugh first are usually the ones who never bother to ask if there's a last page. If you've ever been written off by people who were supposed to know better, and you got the last word anyway, even quietly, even years later, tell me about it in the comments. And if you want more stories like this one, you know what to do. Hit subscribe, because there's always another last page.